One. Hey guys, welcome to the War Dove podcast. I'm your host, War Dove, and today we are talking to Dr. Rita Louise, who is a paranormal expert, a psychic expert, an ancient mysteries expert, and we're really excited to have her on the show. Dr. Louise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. And you told me it's like your second episode, so I guess you must have been putting out good energy to like get me to just show up. So,
I
yay.
I certainly I certainly hope so. I try to put all the positive energy into the world that I can. So the Word Up podcast is all about peace, love, and understanding. I'm a combat veteran myself, and after the war and my experiences, I became very pacifistic. So I'm very, very anti-violence, very, very anti-war. Really more a political center, but very, very anti-war. I think our species needs to evolve beyond violence, evolve beyond warfare, and I believe that since humanity's evolved past all sorts of other horrible things that we've done in our past, we could certainly evolve beyond that if we wanted to. Um, so
Okay, so I'm just going to make commentary here.
please.
I don't think as a species we want to have war, and as a species we want to fight. But then there's, generals gathered in their masses
Mhm.
and the military industrial complex. I mean, I worked in the military industrial complex for 15 years, designing parts for Bradley fighting vehicles and destruct initiation units for missiles.
Yeah.
So, you know, very familiar with that. And it's like, but they don't make any money. And that's like a multi-billion industry. But if there's no war, there's no need to make all this military stuff and pay $10,000 for a hammer.
Isn't that so true? There's a lot of folks making money off of the war industry, and again, I would rather see us be like a Star Trek type civilization, a resource-based economy. I'd like to see us do away with money altogether, but until then, we have to work within the system we have and just do our best
Mhm.
to others, I think, which is what I'm doing, and really is the goal of the show. So, you are an ancient mysteries expert. What's your favorite ancient mystery?
So where I come into the narrative is I like reading like old, boring, dry books that no one would ever pick up. And my first love in life when I was in elementary school was archaeology and anthropology. And so since I haven't really had the opportunity to go like dig anywhere, I like things that are really old and got very much involved in looking at our mythic record, and what the ancients had to say about, I don't even want to say humanity because humanity doesn't even exist in a lot of the really ancient myths. But where I spent a lot of my time was looking at these patterns that represent a global myth that is our heritage, because we think, like we have the Greek myths and they're an isolated group, and we have, the Hawaiian myths and they're an isolated group. But if you start taking these different stories and start comparing them, what you find is that you have key elements in each story that parallels key elements in other stories. So one of my personal favorites, which I found really weird. So in the Bible, and please excuse me if I don't pick the right days, but I think on the third day, God creates the plants and the flora and the fauna. So we have all these plants on the planet.
Mhm.
And then on the fourth day, he puts the sun, the moon, and stars in the sky. So if you read that, it doesn't read right because how can you have plants if there's no sun, moon, and stars in the sky?
Mhm.
It just doesn't work. Photosynthesis doesn't happen. So on a casual reading, you think, well, maybe, it got transcribed incorrectly, or you just kind of take it with a grain of salt and don't really think about it. And in my research, one of the things that I did was I took the Bible and I put it over there because my goal wasn't to prove the Bible or anything the Bible. My goal was to just sit there and look at this narrative. But what I found was that the narrative that unraveled itself supported the story in the Bible because there's multiple stories of like a war that happens, a battle that happens like between Zeus and Kronos. And after the battle, the earth is terraformed. It might be from the body of a giant or some god might do it, but in more contemporary words, the earth is terraformed. And then the sun, moon, and stars are put into the sky.
Hmm.
So it parallels that biblical story, you know. And so it becomes really interesting because if you look for these little nuggets of truth, like the concept of, plants, and then the sun, moon, and stars being put in the sky, and you start looking for those concepts in stories, and then looking at the narrative prior and the narrative after, even though the details might be different, but if you take a step back and kind of look at it as a whole, they're very similar.
Hmm. So the correlation between ancient myths from all over the world fascinates you. It's just it's and it is interesting that there's that correlation in the
It
story.
was kind of mind blowing to me. I mean, I didn't think that it was, we're led to believe that cultures developed by themselves,
Hmm.
and, what is going on in Samaria is different than what's going on with the Aborigines in Australia. But when
Hmm.
you start looking at their stories, or you start looking at their cultural base, there's actually a lot of parallels, which you wouldn't think would happen. Um,
Right. Right. There's too many parallels, like the story of the Great Flood that appears in mythology all over the world. Uh,
mhm.
you find it fascinating, and it's you know it's always been interesting to me, that um, a lot of these myths and legends, a lot of these ancient religions, especially the polytheistic religions, all these cultures in ancient times are visited by so-called gods, right? That come down and teach them everything and
Mhm.
show them how to make fire, show them how to run government, show them how to build buildings. And I always find that interesting. I went to the city of Ur myself while I was with the
Cool.
army. The ancient ruins of Ur, toured around and learned a lot about the Anunnaki. And I find it interesting that the Anunnaki came because they needed gold. They needed
Well, we'll
more.
have a discussion about that concept, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, they needed more gold to apparently use in their vehicles, in their spaceships, so to speak. But of course our ancestors didn't have a word for it, so they called it something else. But I just I find it all a little too convenient that it lines up all over the world. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's always fascinated me how all these mythologies, they seem to line up with the values they're teaching. They seem to line up with the skills they're teaching. Even in the book of Enoch, we have you know, the sons of God, these angels come down and they teach all sorts of skills. They teach astrology, they teach cosmetics,
Mhm.
funnily enough. And I think that some of these so-called gods or angels in these mythological stories could actually be some sort of ancient alien visiting, maybe even crashing.
Well, I mean, that's my take on it,
Hmm.
you know, because have you ever seen God?
I
Have
have
you
not.
ever interacted with God? But these early people interacted
Mhm.
with these beings.
Right, right. And they state so quite literally, quite impressive.
Yeah, very literally.
God said this, God did that. This God did this, this goddess did that.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
But
I
I'm going
find,
to come back to your gold thing.
please.
So because it sticks a craw in my butt, the whole gold thing.
Mhm.
because that whole notion, and I don't mean to diss people, uh, basically came from Zachariah Sitchin's work, where he said that the Anunnaki came here for gold.
Hmm.
And so in my book, which I don't have a copy of sitting here, ET Chronicles, What Myth and Legends Have to Say About Human Origins, where I share all of these myths, and it starts from in the beginning and it goes up to just after the flood narrative. So because that's where the global myth is found. That's where our prehistory is found, where humanity is literally the second to last chapter in the book.
Hmm.
Okay, back to the goal. And so I had read all of Zachariah Sitchin's book, and I had read oh, why is his name not in my head? The guy from South Africa,
It's
The
not.
Gold of the Gods, but no, Slave Species of the Gods.
Hmm.
Michael Tellinger, that's who it
Okay.
is, Michael Tellinger, who I love to death. And so I kind, you have like you study the Bible growing up, and so you have that in the back of your mind. I had Sitchin's work in the back of my mind, and so it's a very valid question. Why were they here? And so I went looking for the gold, literally online, in books, anywhere I could find any reference to the gold. And do you know how much I found?
Hmm. How much? I'm guessing
Nothing.
net zero.
A
Yeah.
big old nut egg.
Hmm.
And it was like, seriously, there are no myths that come out of the Middle East. There's no myths that come out of any culture that talk about, and like Sitchin said, that they needed it for their atmosphere, that they needed to seed their atmosphere with it.
Mhm.
But there were other things that came out of, so there's no stories about them coming here looking for the gold. Some circumstantial myth is the Indian churning of the Milky Ocean, where the Devas, who were the good gods, and the Asuras, who were the bad, evil gods, got together to take this serpent and churn a mountain to get the nectar of the gods to come out. And a bunch of stuff comes out. And one is the nectar of the gods, which is the juice which will give them immortality. That's kind of the closest thing I could find to the gold. With that said, there is cursory information based on behavior, like human behavior, that kind of supports the goal thing, but not in the way that it was stated in some of these other books.
Hmm.
So in South America, everyone's heard that term El Dorado, and it's tied to gold. The city of El Dorado. But really, El Dorado was the chief of this tribe. And during like certain ceremonies, he would cover his body with some kind of grease, and they would take powdered gold and spray it on his body. So he was literally golden.
Hmm.
And he would preside over these rituals as if he were a god. And when he was done, he would immerse himself in water and wash all the gold.
Hmm. I hate to interject, but it sounds like that particular indigenous chief would have enjoyed Goldschlager because it has little flecks of gold in it. So he may have been able to use that for the ceremony.
Maybe. Um, but you find a similar thought process. One of the things that I like is there something in South America that you find in the Middle East, or is there something in the Middle East that you find in Australia? Because I like to have big cultural divergence.
Hmm.
So what we find, like in Egypt, as a secondary example, there is the death mask that the pharaoh would wear. And the death mask, obviously, like the King Tut mask, is made of gold. And they put these masks on so that they would look like a god, so
Hmm.
that when they went into the afterlife, they would be like something raw and be considered a god.
Hmm.
And so there was this thing about looking golden and appearing like a god.
Hmm.
And I have kind of a scientific mind, and it's like, what? what is gold good for? It is makes great jewelry.
Mhm.
I mean, it's sort of conductive, but there's other materials that are more conductive. Not that primitive people needed wires to do stuff with. But one of the things that it's really good at is its reflective capability. And that's why they put it on like the lunar landers,
Hmm.
as like a heat shield or whatever. So, what if, and this is just me putting the question out, what if the gods needed to do something to protect them from UV radiation?
Hmm.
Because the other thing that you find that kind of made you godlike in Africa was they would take ochre, red ochre, and put it on their body. And there are still tribes that cover it, and it's you're thought of as being beautiful, but it's also a great sunscreen.
Hmm.
So what if our interactions with the gods was them covered in gold because they needed a sunscreen?
Hmm.
And we just thought, well, this is what the gods are, and we're doing these things so that we can be like a god ourselves.
Right, right. Like they needed some sort of external suit that was made of some sort of gold composite that protected them from the UV radiation of our star because they came from a system where they didn't have the same UV radiation and they knew their
Correct.
bodies couldn't handle it. That sort of thing.
Hmm.
Interesting.
That's a pretty good thought, don't you think? I think
Oh,
so.
yeah, yeah. It's it's certainly interesting. I would certainly urge everyone to check out the book. The name of that book is again, just so I can remember it.
Sure, it's ET Chronicles, what myth and legends have to say about, excuse me, what myth and legends have to say about human origins. And it's available, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere books are sold.
Okay, great, great. I'm gonna have to pick up a copy myself, add it to the collection. I'll put it next to the Mahabharata, which I'm trying to read.
Oh,
Um,
good luck with that.
it's a very thick text. It's a
It's a
very
hard text.
it's a hard text because, especially when you don't have the cultural background to understand everything that is being said. But I do find it interesting that these gods flew around in flying machines, these
Hmm.
brahmanas. They flew around in some of them are described as flying cities almost. They're huge.
Those are the Sabas,
The Saba.
which it's in the book.
Yeah. It's
There's
a
a whole chapter just on that topic
oh
in
really?
that
Okay.
ET Chronicles book. Because the gods live in heaven. And according to the Greeks, like Olympus was on the top of a mountain, but you couldn't touch Olympus because it was higher than a bird flying in the sky, the
Hmm.
top of Olympus. And so, yeah, I'm not emotionally prepared to go into that piece of conversation, but it is really interesting because you do find these parallels, and you actually find similar parallels in the Americas where they talk about these mountains
Hmm.
that blink on and off.
Hmm.
They appear and they disappear. But yeah, they were like the Death Star from Star Wars. I mean, they were massive, held hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, speaking of mountains that go on and off, there is an indigenous peoples legend here in the Seattle area of M- M- Mount Rainier or Mount Tahoma as it's known in the Nisqually language, I believe, getting angry at one of the other mountains and getting up and moving down the coast and settling somewhere else. I've always been fascinated by that because you can see it from everywhere in the area. It's just
Hmm.
huge. And it does look like it moves. It gets smaller, and then all of a sudden you'll come around the corner and you'll go, wow, that thing is huge. It's almost like
Uh-huh.
it's moving. It's right in your face. It's there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful mountain, a beautiful, beautiful volcano. I hope it doesn't kill us all someday. But
No, that's Mount St. Helens. That's its job.
yeah, yeah. That one's gone off, but Mount Rainier is a is a is just a huge mountain. It has a beautiful glacier on it, and I certainly hope we don't lose the glacier over time. But
Hmm.
certainly is a very beautiful area to live in. I love all the indigenous legends, of the area, the stories of the rainforest, things of that nature. And you can tell, that the area wants to be a rainforest. It really does. It wants to be a rainforest so badly.
But
And
then there were those pesky people that live there.
yes, yes, yes. There's pesky people that came and settled and built cities, and now it can no longer be a rainforest, but it would like to be if it could.
Mhm.
I think it will be someday again. I don't think that human society will be around forever, and I like that old show, Life After People, to show how nature would reclaim the land if all human beings disappeared, and I think we're getting closer and closer to it. With all these crises and wars going along in the world, I'm wondering if there's, some sort of astrological connection to it, some sort of, spiritual connection to it. I feel a lot of danger around the city of Jerusalem in my heart right now. uh,
Mhm. Well,
with
there's a lot going on there, but there's always a lot going on there.
Yes, yes, yes. There's always a lot going on there. When a city's holy to three religions, you're going to have a problem. But let's delve into the psychic phenomenon and psychic abilities part of your work, because
Okay,
I have always been fascinated by psychics. I don't know if you are psychic. I would be thrilled if you were. Um,
that would be me.
oh, really? That would be you? Okay.
That would be me.
Interesting, interesting. Um,
But I want to make one comment before we shift gears. So I've tried reading the Mahabharata, but there's too many characters and too many storylines all going on at the same time that, and I can process a lot, but I could not process that. But if you haven't read the Ramayana, have you tried to read the Ramayana?
I have not.
It was actually a really interesting read. It's the story of Rama, and he like has this fight with the dragons, and then he has a battle with the demon god of Lanka, and it's really long. It's written in lyrical verse, but I really enjoyed it. So if you're trying to read the Mahabharata, you'll feel much better if you try to read the Ramayana, because it's actually readable, because it's a story and not 50 stories all mixed together, and they're talking about this guy and now they're back over here and now they're in the future, and it's like,
What's going
yeah,
on? Yeah. I
I
really have,
can't keep track.
yeah. I cannot keep track. I just tried to keep track of the things I could keep track of, if that makes any sense. Uh,
That makes total sense, to be honest with you.
I mean, you know, I do have a bachelor's degree. I minored in classics. I thought I could handle it, and it has nothing. Um, Greek and Roman legend and Greek and Roman history has nothing on the Mahabharata. I'll tell you that much.
No,
It,
no, but there are some magnificent pieces of, and I'm going to say history in it. I just wish it was more linear
hmm,
in the way that it's presented, but it's not. And
yeah,
so that's where I get kind of confused on it.
right.
And for the people that are listening, if it was just one book, you maybe could take notes, but it's 15 books long.
It is
You know,
huge. It is huge. I'm eyeing it on the bookshelf behind me. That's how I know which one it is, because it's so big. I can see it from here. That's how big it is. Um, yeah. Um, getting into psychic abilities.
psychic stuff.
I've always been fascinated by psychic stuff. I need a psychic in my life.
Damn,
I found you. It's
you
perfect.
found me.
So, I guess, before you delve into whatever you want to delve into on the psychic side, what is it like being psychic? I mean, for me, I would think it would be terrifying.
So that's you know, in all the year I've been doing this work and all the interviews I've done over the years, no one has ever asked me that question.
Huh.
And so I'll start here. So I believe that everybody has some level of psychic abilities, so you could be really open to receiving information, and those things that seem like coincidences that, like, well, I was just thinking about Fred, and then like Fred calls, psychic thing, you know. I mean, I just like calling a spade a spade. But it's on a spectrum. So there are some people that are really open, and then there are some people that can't even like, clap in time to the music kind of thing. and I joke around and I love my friend to death, but I've really only met one person that I would say like had no gift ever. Most people can relate to some kind of an experience that I share.
Mm,
Um, so when you're talking about psychic abilities, it's just something that, you know, I don't want to say you're born with, because again, it's like dancing. Some people can naturally dance better than other people. Some people can do art naturally better than other people do art. So people that are psychic can just naturally be open to receiving that energy. Um, my experience was this is just who I was. And so it's not like there's anything weird going on because it's just how life is and how the world is. And I think people that are open naturally learn ways to turn it off for the most part. Like, people go, well, what is it like? Do you see auras all the time? And I'm like, could you imagine trying to go clothes shopping and you're like looking in the mirror and there's like it's red over here and blue there? It's like, yeah, it's like, wow, this dress clashes with my aura, which is going to change in 10 minutes. It doesn't work that way. Now, there are people in particular who have like near death experiences who their abilities pop open, or if somebody has their Kundalini rise, they can pop open. And so, where they might have had some ability before, now it's like they're receiving all of this stuff, which I'm probably receiving the same stuff, but I'm really good at like not paying attention to it.
okay.
And I joke around and I'm like, well, let me put my psychic glasses on, because I have to kind of tune into it. Um, but then there's the, unavoidable. It's like, walking up to somebody at work and, because they weren't there the day before and looking them in the face. Well, where were you yesterday? Having them check for a brain tumor, only to find out the day before they were having them check for a brain tumor.
Mm,
So my little funny joke was really not so funny. It was just like an overwhelming psychic experience.
ah,
But I didn't know. I just thought it was just really weird coincidence that was going on.
right.
So you can't really gauge. I think, so there are different kinds of psychic abilities. There is knowingness, where you just kind of know things off the top of your head. There's clairvoyance, where you see things in your mind's eye. So you see an image, like, can you see your car in your mind's eye?
Mhm.
Or your mom's face in your mom's eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you receive information on a clairvoyant level, it's like you just see this image. So last Christmas, my dishwasher broke and the service guy was out of town until after the new year. And so there was this big puddle of water, like 4 inches of water in the bottom, which I was like, no, because it will stink.
Mhm.
And I'm sitting there with a coffee cup trying to scoop it out, which was not really working very good. And so I just was like, well, what could I use? And in that little vision center, I see a picture of my freaking turkey baster. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of random, but I'll tell you what, it worked really good because I paid attention to that little image because I've learned when you get this weird crap that comes in your head, you should pay attention to
Right.
it. Some people tend to be a little more auditory. Some of these channels are stronger for different people, where they might hear a word or a phrase, or they might like receive messages, on a more auditory way, like, and not like I'm sitting here talking to you, but like how that voice in your head talks,
Mhm.
it can talk to you in that way. And then there are the feeler people, the empaths that just sense energy. And I think of all of the gifts that someone can have, because you can have one or you can have multiple or some combination, and we're all different. It's the feeling one that's the most challenging because it sits below our heart. And so, from a cognitive, mental perspective, it's a lot harder to diagnose, to like have a mental thing. You just feel stuff. You walk in a room and you just feel uncomfortable. You interact with someone and you feel good. You might interact with somebody else and you feel bad. When COVID was happening, for me, it was totally challenging because everybody was in fear and everybody was panicking. And it was just a really hard energy, even though it wasn't mine. My belief, my personal belief was okay. So this got me a lot of really nasty cards and letters from people because I posted it on Facebook and they didn't like my thought. So back in the day, if somebody in the neighborhood, so I grew up in New York City. So if somebody in the neighborhood got chicken pox, anybody that didn't have chicken pox that knew this kid, even if they were, like a friend of a friend, you went over to their house and you went and played with them so you could get chicken pox. That was how it worked.
Mhm.
And so my suggestion was, well, maybe, we should just go over to the house of somebody that has COVID and just get it over with.
Yeah.
You would not believe the mean cards and I mean, just mean, spiteful. I'm like, well, that's what we used to do.
Well, people went around the corner with COVID. They went around the corner of the building. They went whoop. Everybody went crazy. You could see, you couldn't see anybody smile for 2 years. I couldn't
Hmm.
read people. I had to try to see their smile in their eyes or see their eyes to see what they were feeling because,
Hmm.
you couldn't read the face. I think that a lot of that stuff, for me personally anyway, and you're fine to disagree, I believe a lot of it was a giant psyop to get you to mask up and hide your face and, completely isolate. I think they were testing to see what they could really get away with.
And they
And,
got away with a lot,
and
but they put everyone into such a fear space. And
yes.
if you're sensitive, then it's like the double fear space, and I had to spend a lot of time going, okay, you know, I eat well, I exercise, I was taking extra supplements. I'm pretty healthy, so if I get COVID, am I going to die? No. I mean, I already knew it was a hard no. And then and then I was like, but if you do get it and you die, okay, exit point. I don't really care. And so it wasn't my fear, but why was I so scared?
Right.
And then I was like, oh, because the fear on the planet was so overwhelming that it,
Overwhelmingly,
say that again.
it's overwhelmingly terrifying. Just the static in the air, you could feel it.
Hmm.
You could feel it. And I remember people laughing because I live in Washington. The first outbreak in the States was in a nursing home in Washington. And we were some of the first ones to start this mask and, test thing, which was so novel and strange back then that I took pictures at the beginning of the pandemic, like the first week of going to get tested because I was sick. And I, s- I titled the post Pictures from Inside the Quarantine Zone because you know, Governor Inslee had just shut down the state, and we were one of the first states to shut down, and everyone was amazed. People were laughing, oh, it'll be over in 2 weeks, it'll be this, it'll be that, it's all nonsense. But I mean, there was a real disease and still is. But I, you know, I look at the government's some gain of function research, and I have to wonder, just like Jon Stewart said on Stephen Colbert's show. What's in Wuhan, Stephen? The Institute of Virology that studies coronaviruses in Wuhan, China? Hmm.
Hmm.
I wonder, there was a giant chocolatiness outbreak near Hershey Park, Pennsylvania. I wonder if the Hershey Park could have anything to do with that. It's just, to me,
Hmm.
it seemed like a man-made virus with gain of function. It was so.
Oh, don't even get me started because you would never be able to post this on YouTube. Um, no, it was a very interesting period. And I live in Texas. And so like if you went into bigger cities, Dallas, Houston, everybody was masked up. Where I live, most people, if you were in a store, put a mask on. But
Yeah.
I think that was just more out of courtesy.
Mhm.
Because I know me, walked out the door and that bad boy came off. But then there were the people driving around in the cars with the masks on. And this was my favorite. I mean, because there was a lot of stuff that was shut down. But unlike some states, you could actually like drive in your car. And so I had a boat. And so, me and my friend would go fishing all the time. But then you would be on the lake. This would kill me. We're on the lake, and it's just a little bass tracker, and there would be some other boat, just a little 2-person, 3-person boat, and they're fishing, and they got freaking masks on the lake in the middle of the summer. And I'm like, I don't think my coughing's gonna get that far. I don't get
Yeah. Your coughing's not gonna get that far, and in that situation, coffee won't get you far enough. You need something stronger at that point.
it.
Could you, and it's okay if it's a no, but are you able to, so to speak, put on those psychic glasses? Is there anything you can read about me? Anything at all? I'm always curious about this.
Okay, do me a favor and just say your full name for me real quick.
Joseph Douglas Soul.
So you have this very bright light inside of you, but you doubt yourself. But I feel like that's something you've really been working on, as I'm going to say it this way. I feel like you have finally given yourself permission to go to where spirit wants you to go. I feel like you've left the conventional behind and have instead turned inward to allow that inner guidance to lead you forward. And I feel like, that has been bringing more joy into your life, more passion in what you're doing. And as you're doing it, it's like you're finding that you're succeeding, which is kind of bolstering that self-worth quota.
Hmm.
Because I feel like where you're venturing in, you haven't really ever done it before. You haven't been there before. So there's some nervousness, but when I go back to when you were in your military career, I feel like you had a lot of self-confidence in what you were doing and where you were going. And it was like, and you knew what you needed to do and you just did it,
Mm,
and it's all shifting. But I feel like it's shifting not with someone else telling you what to do, but and I'm going to say spirit telling you what to do.
interesting.
Does
Interesting.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. There's been some recent changes. I volunteered as a chaplain for a few months at a hospital and really got some perspective on life and worry and death. I was always a very anxious person, and what I found when I was working in the hospital when folks were passing away, when people were passing away all around me, it was very similar to being in Iraq, but for some reason Iraq didn't sink in.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain things that happened in Iraq that were similar to working in the hospital, but they didn't sink in. And at the hospital, it really sunk in where it was like, wow, all the things you really think matter, they really don't matter. You're getting
Mm-hmm.
worked up about nothing, man. Because that's where we end up, at least our physical bodies. Everything we're building and accomplishing and trying to do, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't stay. And it gave me a really, really strange perspective, a really new perspective that I hadn't had before.
Well, and I feel like since COVID, people's perspective on life has changed. Like there was a meme that was floating around Facebook and it had this guy walking up a flight of stairs. It was just a cartoon. And over the railing was some monster like, and the guy's just looking at it like, yeah, whatever. And I feel like people's attitude and their energy, has really reflected that. It's like they're not, I mean, stuff scares us, but they're not as scared. And this was a while ago, but there was all kinds of like weird political crap going on, and maybe there was COVID still going on, but the gym was open. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because they had let go of the lockdowns. And so the gym was open, and I walk in, so all this stuff going on. So your brain's kind of processing like all the weirdness on the planet. And there's a volcano that went off in Iceland. And I'm like, okay, all this crazy and a volcano. But if it had been 5 years ago, I think people would have like been talking about the volcano, and they would have been more stressed about this volcano. And now it's kind of like, out a volcano here. Let's, cherry on top, a volcano in Iceland.
Boop. There's your chaos Sunday right there with a volcano on top. I love it.
That's right. I like that. I
Yeah,
think I'm going to steal that.
please use it, please. Whatever helps you, whatever I can offer. And I'll say this to anyone listening. I'll say this to you. I'll say this to anyone listening that if I can offer something and you find something useful, please take it. If you don't find it useful, just leave it. And that's all. And I get that from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I find that interesting. In his books, he says, you know, if you find this useful, use it. If you don't find it useful, just leave it.
Hmm.
Just so simple. And I really have a lot of respect for that man. I really do.
Hmm.
Um, but I do want to delve in a little bit to ghosts and the supernatural, which is another one of your
Okay.
areas of expertise. Now, I've always
Okay.
been fascinated by ghosts, and I won't tell you why, because I think you probably already know or have a feeling about it. But I've always been fascinated with the paranormal, and I just want to get your take on ghosts and the afterlife and your experiences with ghosts and spirits, things of that nature, because I always find people's experiences fascinating, especially from a psychic perspective.
So, all right, but I'm going to pitch a different book. So one of my other books is called Dark Angels, An Insider's Guide to Ghosts, Spirits, and Attached Entities. So just saying. Um, I mean, I believe ghosts are real. I've seen plenty of them. I grew up in a haunted house. There was the dead guy that lived in the basement, that even though nobody talked about the dead guy in the basement, we all knew about the dead guy in the basement. And if you asked anybody, even though we never talked about it, where the dead guy was, we would all be able to say, because there was a bathroom in our basement, a full bath.
Hmm.
I don't know, that he lived by the bathroom in the basement, and he was residual energy. And I had heard from this guy who owned the deli around the corner, Mr. Gruber, that somebody had been killed in the house. And I'm like, it's the dead guy, and he got killed in the basement. So that was my earliest experience with ghosts. And so it has left me spooked, although I have done ghost hunting and have gone into different places as the group psychic, because it's just really weird. It's like, oh, yeah, there's some guy there. Oh, yeah, there's this, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't bother me at all. But don't make some weird noise, or don't flick the light on, because that will freak me out. And don't make me go in a room that's dark by myself. That's so not but when you talk about ghosts, so there's 2 points, because I know we're getting kind of close on time. So not all hauntings are active. There's what are called residual hauntings, where just the energy of that person or energy of that situation is just stuck there. So you might see somebody walk down a hall into a room, and they just make the same pattern over and over again, and there's not any conscious awareness, versus an active haunting where there is a presence there, and they can follow you around the house, and you can interact with them, or they might interact with you. And many people think that ghosts are demons, that haven't, you know and while I will say that there are some non-corporeal beings that come to this earth or are on this earth that I would even put in the demon category. Your basic typical active haunting ghost is, like just some guy. Um, but it doesn't mean that they're stuck on earth. And so, and you get a little like caught up in religion here because, in Christianity, you die and you go to heaven. And so there are some people that believe that, once you're in heaven, you're like locked up there, like you're in a freaking jail and you can't ever leave because you're in paradise, damn it. But the reality is that there are people that have died, and I'm going to say have gone to heaven just for simplicity's sake, but then they come back and visit,
Hmm.
and hang out. I mean, I remember this was years ago. I was moving into a new house with my at the time husband, and we were just literally moving around the corner. It was not a big move. I packed several boxes up, take it over to the house, unpack it. I mean, I had a month to like get everything, so it was a very slow process. But the kitchen table had been moved. Some of the big pieces of furniture had been moved, and the kitchen table was one of them. And there was this man sitting at the kitchen table, drinking a cup of coffee, smoking a cigarette. I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
And I kind of tuned into him, and his energy reminded me of my husband, whose father had passed. So I was like, hey, if your dad was in the house, because they were ranchers, if your dad was in the house, would he be sitting at the kitchen table drinking a cup of coffee and smoking a cigarette? And he goes on about, well, he wasn't really in the house a lot and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I get that. But if he was in the house, is that what he would be doing? And he goes, yeah, pretty much. And I'm like, well, he's here, and I pointed to the chair he was sitting in,
Hmm.
but he was there because his son, had gotten married, bought this house, you know what I mean? It was this whole life encounter. It's not that he was haunting us, he was there visiting and participating
Yes.
with us. And I've had clients that have been, well, my brother comes, my twin brother comes around, and I'm like, so it's like, but it's evil. And I'm like, it's your freaking twin brother. He's just coming around because it's your twin brother. So parents do that, grandparents do that, spouses, spouses that have passed will just show up because they want to participate with
Hmm.
you in your life.
Yeah.
So it's not something to be scared of or think it's like some demon that looks like your mom.
Hmm. Yeah, there are people that I would like to have show up that
Mhm.
um I think they've shown up before through
And that's a very strong one.
songs on the radio, but there's been too many synchronicities there while I was visiting home and in the car with someone very close to the deceased. A song came on the radio that was very familiar, and then we got done doing what we were doing, and then we got back in the car, and there was a different song again, very familiar to the deceased person, very related to the deceased person, and it
See, I don't really take it as synchronicities.
hmm,
It's kind of like, huh, maybe they're around. I mean, I can feel them. So when that happens, just kind of check in to see if you feel them.
yeah, yeah. And you know, I felt the person in question while I was working in the hospital, actually.
Hmm.
Oh, that's funny because I walked in and I got a call for a visit on a floor as a chaplain, and I got room 1111. I walked
Cool.
in there, I did my thing, and I came out and I went, all of a sudden I felt something, and I went, that's interesting. Thank you for the visit. That was interesting. And then it was gone.
And that's what they do.
Yeah. It was there, it was gone. And
Hmm.
I would like I would like a more permanent visit. I would like um a more visual visit. I would like to have an auditory visit, but I haven't had one.
I've been doing this work a long time, and I not from dead people. I
Mm.
mean, I one of my husbands passed away and he will show up.
Mm,
And the way I know he's here is because I can feel him and then I automatically start crying.
mm,
It's like, oh, you really must be here because
mm,
now I'm crying.
right.
Um, my dad has showed up once.
Mm,
Um, that's pretty much it.
mm,
You know, I have more pets that show up than family,
yeah. Yeah.
you
That
know, but they don't, they don't come permanent. It's just kind of random.
they
You know,
stop by.
sometimes you can ask them to come and
Mm,
they'll come,
mm.
but
I'll have to try that. I'll have to ask certain people to come by and pay me a visit.
well, and put a chair, put out. So in Jewish culture, and it's for Passover, and hope I'm saying this right, that you set a place for Elijah. I
mm,
think it's Elijah. And give him a place setting and a glass of wine and you just leave it. So when my sister got married, so I'm half Jewish. And so when my sister got married, my grandmother, who really wanted to be at the wedding, had passed about 4 or 5 months earlier. And I'm like, leave her a place, set her a place at the table and have that be her place so that she has somewhere to go
mhm.
at the wedding and just identify it. This is grandma, maybe put something of hers there, so that it's hers.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a wonderful thought and a wonderful idea. And I'm going to try that. And I encourage all my listeners, all my viewers to try that as well if there's someone you want to get in contact with, because life can be so painful. I know it can. And I think that knowing that our loved ones are near even after they've passed brings people a lot of comfort. So
Mhm.
just hold on to that comfort. And, folks, with that, I know we're getting close to time. And I just want to thank Dr. Louise for coming on and being my honored guest. I really appreciate it,
Well,
um,
you're so welcome.
especially having someone of your abilities, of your stature, of your well-knownness, shall we say, to
I'm
be
almost a superstar.
yeah, to be on a Rinky Dink podcast like mine is a true honor, and I'm truly humbled by it. Thank you so much. Um,
But can I tell people, if you'd like to schedule a session with me, like a psychic reading or get one of my books, which we talked about a couple of them, my webpage is soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com. And one of the things that I'm really sharing with people, and you might enjoy this. So every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central, I do a live stream and I open with some topic of conversation. So, like this week I talked about the law of attraction. A few weeks ago, I talked about doing readings using like tarot cards. And then I open up the chat and people can get free readings on air.
okay.
And so that's every Thursday night, 7 to 8 p.m. Central Time. And the easiest place for them to access it is on YouTube because it streams live there. And they can go to Just Energy Radio on YouTube. So that's 3 words, Just Energy Radio, because it's all just energy. On YouTube and click the live button, 7 p.m. Central, and you get to hang out with me.
I'm gonna stop by. You know I am, because
Okay, that would be great. And you know what? You stop by and I will plug your show because that's how I fly.
I love it. I love it. And again, just a true honor. I feel, that I've made a friend here on YouTube. I feel I have a friend in Texas now. And just so you know, you have a friend up in Seattle now. It's just been
Okay.
a thrill to speak with you. And folks, until next time, to all those out there listening on the airwaves, in YouTube, wherever you are, just remember until next time, folks, be humble, be kind, and most importantly, peace.